Thank you.
I'm really fond of Yamaha's new definition of FM, the future of music. Gary and I spend so much time doing technical things that we really have the opportunity to get involved in music as we have for the last 3 days. And I think that perhaps together we appreciate it more than we ever have. We'll understand rather clearly what we're talking about. It seems to me that right now that we're somewhere around 1750. Bach having lived 1685 to 1750, he was really the best of one style of music. At that time, music took off in a different direction. Analog synthesizers today, I think, are about as good as they're going to get. Digital control of analog oscillators, filters, envelope generators, they're really quite sophisticated. We've taken off in a new direction, a far better direction. The old analog systems where you would have a sawtooth, some kind of a ragged wave shape, and with a filter, remove the top, remove the bottom. It worked. It works rather well, but it's not realistic. You can't get involved in what is happening on natural instrumental sounds where internal activities are happening, where the harmonics are moving around inside. Over time, there is a change inside, not just on the edges of the tone. Yamaha, with their FM technology, the future of music, is able to do some wonderful things. Frequency modulation, that's the proper term for what we're doing. This is half of the formula for those of you who would like to be a little bit technical as to what we are doing, combined with this, a little bit more sensible for the musicians. We're dealing with sine waves. One is called a modulator, one is called a carrier. The carrier deals with pitch. So if you were to hear this, it's a sine wave. And you notice that on the computer, we are changing the pitch of the carrier. If we were to modulate for the sake of understanding, change it, laying one on top of the other, we come up with very complex wave shapes. Let's add a modulator to it. Changing the pitch of the modulator, you see how the timbre is changing. This is sort of the essence of what we're able to do with this. The modulator, the one that is changing the wave shape of the carrier. On the left-hand side of the screen now, you see a modulator going to a carrier. When John Chowning first became involved with the FM concept at Stanford University, it looked just like that. Two sine waves, very simple. Had a nice talk with John as to what he was doing and how it was happening, and what was possible, what was tough, and what did he believe to be totally impossible. Possible, he said, were bells, chimes, clanky sounds, clunky kinds of sounds, things like, Gary?
Clunky sound.
Yamaha, having acquired the technology from John Chowning and having the largest musical research lab in the world, on the right-hand side, something considerably more sophisticated. From the carrier being the pitch you remember, back around 180 degrees out of phase to the modulator, and it loops around. All kinds of internal structures will happen now, changes will happen, and it opens up new timbral changes and possibilities that will not exist the way it was originally conceived. Something a bit Richard, perhaps. The GS2, where Gary is seated, consists of 2 layers of FM. The regular way on the left-hand side, and then with the Yamaha's technology with nesting, with feedback loops. For example, look on the right-hand side, the carrier, the one that's producing the pitch, going out so that we can hear it, being modulated, changed, but that output also going down to a different modulator, to a different carrier, that coming back to the first one. Extraordinarily complex things can happen out of that.
Basically, to give you an idea of how I program when I'm working with GS2 has 2 layers. If you relate that to our computer, we've got 2 of our little TV screens that come into play. Now, if you saw that first formula, when I first looked at it, I wrote it down and then I threw it away because I didn't want to deal with it again. Clark and I use our ears to voice the sounds, not basically, the computer is a tool, but the bottom line is our ears. We're playing musical instruments, we're musicians, the end result has to be a pleasing musical sound. I take something, let's say an electric piano, and I'll use one of the layers in this type of a system without the feedback for a very pretty bell-like sustained piano sound. I utilize the other layer for either the pluck of the tine or the strike of the key hitting bottom, that wooden kind of a sound like that. This is the type of thing we come up with the first combination of clocks. Very pure, clean sound. One of the nice things is that I don't have to worry about tuning it. I don't have to worry about breaking parts inside. It's all done electronically, but we achieve that acoustic type of a sound. Now, as we worked further in our library, years ago did those types of sounds, when we added that feedback loop, as Clark said, we got greater harmonic things happening. Brass initially was impossible. With the new system, it became possible. Here's what we did. Again, how I did this sound, using one layer for the basis of the sound. If I just touch the key, I hear the carrier. Sounds much like a sine wave. The modulator adding the harmonics to the sound. The neat thing about GS is, again, with the musician in mind, we've made it touch responsive. One of the things is touch responsive modulation. In other words, those harmonics come into the play the harder I hit the key. Different degrees. Moving from that type of a sound, we started going for breathier things. Again, 2 layers for a flute, for instance. We use the bottom layer for the nice sustained part of the flute. But when you play a flute, you get that kind of a sound. So adding that with the aftertouch so you get some articulation. Playing lightly. Hitting the key harder. I get that little chirp. Challenge from there, taking that initial kind of a starting sound of the instrument. What about pluck types of things? The initial piece you heard we did with FM products, this type of a sound. Percussive sounds? Yes, possible. By taking those feedback loops, we have right at this point in our system, this circuit right across here, we have a level control. If we increase that level of feedback, then we have, again, more harmonic things happening. We had musicians ask for, rather than these very pretty kind of sounds, for more dirty, full, outrageous kind of sound, so we have things like this. So the instrument is capable of doing things like that. Synthesized analog types of sounds, if we cut back the feedback and approach it like we're voicing analog synthesis, yes. Beautiful pluck things. One of the hardest things I found to do was the acoustic piano. There's many situations where you may not have an acoustic piano to work with, miking problems. GS, since it feels like a piano, it has either 88 or 73 wooden keys, balanced like a piano action for our players that love the response of a piano. I've been working, I think now, 4 years to get a piano sound. Finally, the bottom line was to not analyze it again on a computer, but sit down at a real piano with my little watch here, which has one of those little timers on it, and time different parts of the instrument. For instance, on the top of a piano, the note decays much faster because the string is shorter than the bottom notes. That was one factor we can deal with the programmer by doing something called keyboard scaling, which is using all these lines you see. Each line represents, in this case, the level of groups of 3 notes. So if I want to take out basically this F, F sharp, and G, if I take one of those lines off, you don't even hear it. So I can get these very subtle scalings. If I scaled it visually like this, if I played up, the volume level would go like that. The other thing with the piano is if you push down a pedal, you play 6 notes sustained, you're hearing those 6 notes, but you're also hearing all the other strings open because all the dampers are lifted. Therefore, there's all kinds of harmonic things happening there. Analog, I was never able to do it because I'd get one note that might be okay. The minute I moved up an octave, I lost it. Fix that note, the bottom octave drops out. So, the type of thing I did 4 days in a room going. And if you're ever worked in a music store with a piano tuner around, that's what I was doing to the people around me. Started getting closer and closer to a piano. Once I found some basic sounds, I made a number of different types, because once you find it on the computer, you can change subtle levels and things like that. Also, on the front of the GS2, you have an equalizer, and it's a very effective equalizer. In other words, if I bring up the treble, you hear a change. Mids, low end, so for different types of pianos, I'll use different types of tone settings. If I want my basic rock and roll kind of this type of piano, bring up the highs. If I was playing at a Shakey's Pizza Parlor, I may detune it and bring up the mids a little bit and do something like. So I can cover that kind of ground. If I am doing a rehearsal and I need a classical type of piano, we'll take off the detuning, roll off the high end a little bit, and we have. The thing I achieved, I feel, is that it plays like a piano, which was important. It doesn't have to sound exactly. This instrument can create sounds that sound acoustic that we've never heard before. But now, I've got this dynamic range. And take it away, Clark.
It still sounds like a piano to me. I don't care. It's the whole idea. I know that the guys from Toto who have been playing during the trade show, I understand that James Newton Howard, superb keyboard player, rather than using a real piano which is sitting there because of the problem of amplification, has been using this kind of a piano. The guys from Manhattan Transfer have told me that in concert situations, they often find that electrically it's able to be more realistic from the audience's point of view than the real thing. A movie that I did called Modern Problems, they had a lot of steel drums in them. Did you ever try and mic steel drums? It's all but impossible. We used artificial steel drums because it was easier to deal with than the real thing. The GS1 differs from the GS2 in that rather than having 2 layers of FM, there are 4 layers. It allows us to do a number of things. Certainly anything that can be done on the GS2 can be done on the GS1. The programmer that we use is the same programmer, but now we use all 4 screens. You'll be able to have both richer sounds in some case, multiplicities of sounds. The set that I'd like to play for you right now is a somewhat different set from what you have heard.
Call that our Sunday set.
The Sunday set's an interesting idea. If you consider around the United States how many perhaps small buildings there are, small churches with awful organs. I played a lot of them for 25 years. I played in churches before I got all involved in the motion picture and the television business. This last Palm Sunday, I was asked to do a substitute because the organist got sick on Saturday night, and there was one little hoopy 4-foot flute that worked. The rest of the organ was dead. There are all manner of disasters that could happen. By the same token, being an organist and a choir master, a lot of times it's easier to rehearse the choir with a piano. It was a good piano sound. Doing Baroque music, it might be wonderful to have a couple of recorders. We have those. It might be nice to do some things with harpsichords. We have those. Next to the sanctuary of the church, there might be, depending on denomination, fellowship hall, social hall, whatever they call it. It'd be fun to have a Rhodes. It would be fun to have some brass instruments, some entertainment. A GS1 is able to cover a remarkable amount of ground. Some of the things that are possible on it, Gary's going to show you. Before he does that, as he's trying to figure out what to do with these wires that keep getting in our way, I understand on the last Billboard list of the top 100 records, 29, you're hearing a GS1. That's telling you something about how wonderful this instrument is.
As we developed the voice library for the GS series, initially we were asked to do basically reproductions of sounds. Piano, strings, brass, fine. I noticed in the GS, if I have 4 layers, you heard how rich a GS2 sounds. I could take, let's say, 1/2 of an electric piano and then use the other 2 layers for some other type of sound. And I started thinking of an entirely new concept of a library where we could do things with aftertouch and take advantage of the touch response of the GS series. So here's the result of the first experiment, which I call electric piano brass. I can use anything I like my little fingers can be the brass and these 4 fingers on each side can be the piano because it's totally independent touch-wise. So if you're doing a comping thing where you're responsible for filling in the background, I can basically take care of 2 things at once. One thing that I haven't been able to change in product development is that I only have 2 hands. So anything that I can do with the keyboard is always to my advantage. Taking that a step further, take something like a standard jazz organ sound. It would be nice to have a brass section behind you there, but control it with the touch. Then, take something pretty like the harpsichord. Use the other 2 layers for, say, some type of orchestral bed, or what we call background. Now the neat thing about this, the GS series programmer has a very long attack rate. So I can have the pluck sound there initially when I play, and then if I hold my fingers down, the other sound comes in behind you. Now by adding aftertouch, all I have to do is push down on the key. Then next challenge, with that same type of a concept, we need sounds for Clark in Hollywood. He's got responsibilities for major TV production, movie production, sound effects. Well, you can do some wonderful things by taking a standard sound, let's say from Clark's liturgical library, and then take the Leuenberger Madness behind it and put in another sound, and again with the fingers. So we have that covered. Then thinking about keyboard scaling, where you can use those different types of ranges of taking out, the level of a sound, we thought, why not just take out one whole side halfway up the keyboard and create some split type of voices. So scale in a bass here, and just take a piano we've created already and shave off the bottom end so I can have. Or put horns on top. Or organ on top. Or strings. Two sounds covered. One funny thing that we discovered, split the keyboard 4 ways. Why not? We have 4 layers of synthesis. We can cut it off wherever we want. So I can take the bottom half of the keyboard and do this. So I've got percussion section, bass drum, cowbell, wood blocks. Okay, so anything's possible. Where we've gotten to now, we've covered, I think, all the standard sounds. We're up into the 100-somethings, which brings up an interesting point with GS. When we're programming in the studio, I know when the professionals are working with these little voice cards, I don't have one with me, but
There's one. Right on the back.
See that?
You see, that's our problem.
I can't
You
even
lose
find it.
these.
Here's the voice card. These, I sit on them, I spill things on them, I drop them between the keys. So I had to have a way of organizing all the hundreds that we've been putting together. So, we contacted a fellow named Eddie Reynolds, one of our outside consultants. Memory expander, 112 voices, plug in a board, drill a hole, put in a switch, 7-bank selector times 16 preset sounds of the instrument gives you 112. Okay. Now, to keep the cards in order, and I know there's some GS owners in the audience that are going to love this, we have the GS1 voice library book. Ed Cornett in product development has put together a grouping where we have keyboard sounds, which might be electric piano, acoustic piano, vibraphones, marimbas, so on and so forth, clavinets, string sounds, brass sounds, percussive sounds like steel drums, mallets, that type of percussion, and our special effect. We're adding now the Clark's liturgical library to cover that market. And to group them and make it visually appealing, we color-coded the book so that we have the voice card on the right in its little slot protected. Next to it, the description of what the sound is. Next to that, we have the actual performance notes. For instance, if you were in church playing tubular bells, it might be nice to know that eventually it's going to do this. Right?
And you're going to retire.
And you're
That's
gonna
your
retire.
last Sunday.
So that will tell you, tubular bells, hold down key, you will get synth after attack, that kind of a thing. We had a request for pitch bend. Everybody plays synthesizer, it's always got a wheel on it. I need to bend my guitar, bend things. Well, if you think about this instrument, we have some wonderful acoustic sounds. Have you ever heard a bent marimba or a bent piano, right? Now we've made it possible. Taking a standard sound to give you an idea of GS tonal possibility, jazz guitar might be a nice thing that I can bend. Taking a percussive or plucked kind of a sound, it's great to do. But if Clark would bend my piano for me, it's kind of fun. a lot of fun with things like that. The pitch bend is either a wheel or a foot pedal, depending on what type of thing you want. Any questions we'd be glad to answer afterwards as far as installation and price.